Everybody out there, this is Joseph from Joseph Organic Bakery. I have my good friend here, Adam Gilreath, right?
Okay.
Originally from Texas, who has a fascinating story, and he became a good friend and a very good customer of our Kamut stone ground bread. Before we get into this, I wanted to give a little introduction to him, and he will tell a little bit of his story, and then we can talk about how the bread comes into play as well. Okay, Adam, so tell us where you're from, where you're born, what's your story?
So I grew up in South Texas, San Antonio, born and raised. I was part of the Reform community down there. Raised, going to temple every Saturday. Part of youth group. Went to Shabbos services. Got the bar mitzvah. Did the confirmation, and went to public schools out there. And very early on, and it's something a lot of kids my generation and now younger have been introduced to, was pharmaceutical medication at an early age. So by the time I was 10, say 11, I had already been introduced to Adderall through friends, which is a form of methamphetamine.
And Adderall, just so people don't understand, Adderall is what?
It's a methamphetamine.
And used today for?
For ADD medication.
So they're giving this to children.
Children.
I read even now 4-year-olds are even able to be prescribed by doctors.
Which
as
is
Adderall.
crazy, because if you look at the chemical makeup, there's no difference between Adderall, the ADD medication, and street meth, except purity. And they've changed the chemical structure of Adderall just slightly, so you can't smoke it.
Okay.
That's the only difference.
But you can squish it and snort it.
You squish it and snort it. But that's the only
So
difference.
you started taking Adderall.
Probably around 10 or 11.
This was by a doctor or just experimenting with?
A friend.
With
so
friends.
A friend got prescribed it. He grew up on Ritalin, which is chemically close to cocaine, actually.
Sure.
Another very weird thing. And he took it, stayed up all night, had a lot of fun, and started pocketing his pills. So I'd go over to his house on the weekends, 10, 11 years old, and we'd eat a bunch of Adderall and stay up all night and act crazy. And around that same time, I was introduced to Vicodin in the same way. A friend got a surgery or hurt himself and got the medication, had a lot of fun on it, and so, a lot of my childhood was going over to a friend's house to spend the night and raiding parents' medicine cabinets. And in the early 2000s is when you started getting, those kind of ads, like, "Are you your kid's drug dealer?" It's very true, and I think a lot of parents didn't realize when these medications were coming out that they were supplying their children with drugs.
Wow.
And so the older I got, and the harder it became to get enough drugs from people's medicine cabinets or prescriptions, I wound up doing street heroin by the time I was 14.
14, you were already buying street heroin?
Street heroin,
because you were addicted to the
opiates, yeah.
So your body, what did you feel? Your body was like you felt lacking if you didn't take it?
If you don't take it after being consistent with taking a medication, like Vicodin, like Oxycontin, your body becomes dependent on it, and you get flu-like symptoms if you stop taking it. So you actually get sick.
Get physically sick.
You get physically sick. So
so to avoid that, you're going to try to feed this.
Feed the addiction. So I'm somebody in recovery. I do recovery coaching. So I work one-on-one with clients when they come out of treatment centers, kind of help them get readjusted to life. And I buy into addiction as a disease, and that it's a disease in the way that it's apparent with or without the drugs. That the drugs are just a symptom. So because I had this thing called addiction, one of my symptoms was uncontrolled drug use. That the real issue was that I had an utter inability to accept life on life's terms. So kind of like an emptiness I needed to get filled. I was lacking purpose, lacking direction, anxious, and where that manifested in my life before the drug use was the acting out in class, the stealing, just kind of all around being you know, one of the troublemakers as a kid. Now looking back, what I see that as was the nature of my disease. I felt less than, I was self-absorbed, and I was self-centered, and that manifested in these negative behaviors that at first I was labeled as, you know, either being, so what I'm trying to think of, like deficient. So I was a problem kid and I wasn't paying attention in class because I had learning disabilities, you know, and so I got put into special ed, I got put into CMC, a lot of like counselors and therapists.
That was already after you went to the drug scene.
Well, no, this was actually before the drugs.
Before the drugs.
This is from like 6, 7, right when I started school. So I know the drugs happened very early in my life, but also did the behavior problems. And so I mean, and so what's funny is my parents had been harassed by counselors and teachers for years to put me on Adderall, to put me on this medication that I was already abusing.
It was already taken.
And so this kind of shows for me how the whole system's kind of backwards, right? You've got boys acting up and causing trouble because of a sense of needing something bigger than themselves, needing direction, and we've criminalized that behavior. So before I was even into my teens, I was being told that my behavior was criminal, that I wouldn't come to be anything because of the way I was acting. And that just reinforced in my mind that this is who I was. So to go and do drugs didn't seem so crazy to me because of what I was being told and then what I was being reinforced with by watching, you know, TV and movies, you know, the bad kids and this and that, they're into drugs, and that kind of snowballs in this effect of claiming an identity that I held on to a long time that wasn't really me, and that identity was, you know, kind of that scoundrel, like, drug addict. So when I started getting into the heavy legal trouble.
When did you start? So you're 14, you're on heroin, then what happened after that? You ended up going to jail, correct?
Yeah, so by the time I was 18, I had gotten into a severe car wreck, another one of many I'd gotten into, and during this car wreck, a police officer had been following me and noticed I nodded off while driving and searched my car and found drugs. And so, and that incident is what led me to my first treatment center. And I was in and out of treatment for a long time, but my first introduction to recovery, to abstinence-based programming, to any kind of mental health addiction treatment was when I was 18.
18, how long were you in this treatment center for?
That one was for 30 days, and then I went to a halfway house and I ended up using again. So, and you see this pattern a lot within myself and people who struggle with this disease, and it's just like any other disease. You're not going to get angry with somebody who just found out they're diabetic and their diabetes comes back because they found it hard to maintain a regular schedule of taking their insulin, or they found it hard to all of a sudden change their lifestyle to start fitting in healthy foods.
You're right. You're in a particular lifestyle, and that's that lifestyle of a drug addiction, which is it's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle.
Which we'll talk about the proper lifestyle with spiritual 100%. And food. That's what we're getting into. The next thing, then you got out of this halfway house. You were trying to go right your straight path a little bit.
Trying to go, and a lot of it was to make the courts happy, to make my family happy, and that's the big thing with recovery. No one is going to get clean unless the desire is coming from themselves. And we know this, hasidus talks about this a lot, with directing the will, you know, and having proper thought, and to get a solid foundation in recovery, if it's not coming for a desire to help yourself, you're not going to have enough self-love to stop poisoning yourself. So you went to the halfway house, you were trying to kind of get straight for about how long? 18, 19, 20, 21. So for another 3 years.
For another 3 years of going back and forth.
Back and forth, back and forth. And so at this time, I had tried the Suboxone, which is being pushed right now. It's the new kind of methadone. It's a substitute that people are given so that they don't go back to the street.
And what happened with that?
It's called harm reduction. So what happened with that is I was put on a very high dose. I was one of the first 10,000 people outside of the original trials to be given it. I had to go to a military doctor to get it. They put me on a bunch of psych meds because I was presenting as somebody with bipolar disorder. The mood swings, the erratic behavior, which kind of makes sense.
They put you on things like Prozac or?
So no antidepressants. They put me on Lamictal, Abilify,
So you're just going from one group of drugs to another group of drugs.
So I actually I did some time here in Palm Beach at the gun club, and there's a really great psychiatrist that runs the mental health for the jails, and he taught me something very interesting. You know, our brain doesn't know the difference between street drugs and what the doctor is prescribing us. And like we spoke about earlier, the pharmacists know this because there's really no difference between Adderall.
There is no difference in Adderall, amphetamines, and meth.
And there's not much chemical difference between something like Vicodin, which is codeine, and the morphine byproduct that comes out of heroin. Your body processes heroin into morphine, which is the exact same thing codeine does.
Wow.
So there's your brain doesn't know the difference.
Wow.
It doesn't, and what's crazy now is we heard, especially down here in Florida, all this fear about flocka, people are eating each other's faces, and that chemical that they're getting from China, they're getting it from the same factories that are selling that chemical to the pharmaceutical companies. So Wellbutrin, which is a very popular psychotropic medication right now to help people get out of depression, is actually made out of the same stuff as bath salts. It's the same chemical
factories.
Same factories. They just buy it direct from China, and they make it into a crystalline.
So they're just monitoring maybe the dosage or.
And that's it. Yeah. So the people that are doing Wellbutrin.
It's all chemical dependence. It's all chemical dependence. So this is still 21 years old. You're trying to get out of it. It's not. You're not really.
It's not working. I'm suffering a lot. I'm on Suboxone. I was on Suboxone for 2.5 years. 3 milligrams a day, which is now looking back is an insane amount. I'm on all these psych meds and I'm suffering. I'm suffering and I'm still doing drugs.
You're still doing drugs in addition to that.
I'm still going to the street. I'm still sneaking out from my family.
Wow.
I'm still smoking crack. Because chemicals aren't changing my behavior. They're just stopping me from one specific thing. And I broke down. And I reached out to family and I came out here. I went to a program here in Miami called Better Way. It's an indigent program for homeless people. 6 months I stayed there. And I did well. I did well for a very long time.
How long?
3.5 years.
So you were pretty clean for 3 years.
Yes.
You were working?
Yes, I was working. I was involved in recovery, but I hadn't given myself over to recovery fully. So I hadn't finished.
So you're about 24 years old right now?
Yeah.
Okay, and then what happened?
So I stayed clean for a little while, but the behaviors were still there. So I'm thinking, well, I'm doing good, I'm off the drugs, I'm not doing anything, but the selfishness, the self-centeredness, the fear, the anxiety, it's all still there because I'm not dealing with the core issue.
You're not dealing with the core issue.
And the core issue is that utter inability to accept life on life's terms. That's really what the disease of addiction is.
Wow. Can we repeat very slowly to the people how you define addiction? It's an interesting definition.
Addiction is the utter inability to accept life on life's terms. And that's where the drugs come in. They're a symptom of that non-acceptance. Something happens in your life, it doesn't go the way you want it. You have a few options, right? You can try better next time. You can try to change who you are, or what the addict finds out is that you can change your perception of the situation through chemical help.
Okay.
And that's really what it is the drugs are a medicating of that inability to accept God's world as it is.
Okay, so now we're 24 years old. You're wavering back and forth.
Back and forth.
Now
I'm struggling a little bit.
but you think you're over this.
I think I'm doing great.
And then what happened?
But the behavior's still there. So still chasing women, still staying out late, still not looking towards my future, not working on my character, and I.
Over a matter of time, you're going back into the same abyss you were there before.
Exactly.
How long?
So I used for about 2 years. I went back out. I started using drugs again because there comes a point where you can't stand yourself with the way that you're acting.
Okay.
You know it's not right to get angry in traffic, but you keep yelling in traffic. Well, I know when I'm high, I don't yell in traffic. So it's that kind of mentality with somebody who has
So now you're 26 and
I start using drugs again. Actually by 26 I'm in prison again.
you got to prison.
Yeah. So what happens with me is there's, because it's about the behavior, it's really a behavioral disease, addiction. There's not a difference between the drugs and the behaviors, right? So both are symptoms of the disease, right? So when I start doing drugs, very soon I'll start with the criminal activity again. And if I start with the criminal activity, I'll start with the drugs. You know, I don't have that ability to not have that cash register honesty. If I start not having that cash register honesty, I'm working with an employer, if you want to get the image, the metaphor. If I'm working for an employer, not ringing up the totals correctly and pocketing a little change. If I'm doing that, I'll end up doing drugs. Or if I'm doing drugs, I'll end up doing the criminal activity.
So
it's connected.
So what was very interesting, you mentioned to me then that you in prison is where you actually really learn the root core of how to get off the drug addiction,
Yes.
correct?
So
that's now
So
the crux of
after
what we're talking about.
after I get arrested, thank God I had some time in recovery. So I'm a big proponent. People say to people all the time who are in recovery after they relapse, well, what's going to be different this time? This time. The way I see it, there's only the one time from my first interaction into the recovery world to me having I just picked up 5 years on the 31st. I got 5 years clean.
Wow.
So
So
that's
5 years clean.
5 years clean from all mood and mind altering chemicals. That includes alcohol.
No Prozac,
No psych meds, no nothing.
no nothing.
So people always ask, well, what's going to be different this time? With every relapse and every mistake, I learned more and more of what recovery is and what's necessary for me to keep it. So the biggest thing that people can do for people who are struggling with addiction is not beat them up when they're down. And part of that is not necessarily asking what's going to be different this time. It's what did you learn? You know, our friend Gedalia talks about it all the time. You don't have failures, what did you learn?
What did you learn?
And that's very important for recovery, is understanding that the only thing that person lost is their clean date. They didn't lose any knowledge of recovery, because whatever you get that keeps you clean for a day, that's good knowledge. That's good information. You learned how to stay clean for a day. So I'm in jail. Thank God I had that time in recovery, right? And I make a deal. I make a deal with myself, with God. I say, look, you got me. Did whatever I need to do to get closer to you, to get closer to myself. I don't care what these people, the sentence they give me. You take away this itch and this desire to do drugs. Because even while I was in jail, I was still thinking and obsessing about drugs. You take away this obsession, and you got me. You know, I'm on your path, right? I woke up the next morning, and halfway through the day, I realized I hadn't thought about drugs. You know, so thank God I had that understanding that the process I had started putting myself through was the steps. You know, that I admitted my problem with addiction. I admitted that my life had become unmanageable, and with that admitted starts the process of losing the obsession. You know, and there's a difference between obsession and the compulsion to use drugs. When someone is on drugs, they can't stop. They can't stop.
I know you're in the middle of the story. How involved in the Jewish world today? The Jewish world as a whole and the religious Jewish world is drugs and drug. How much of a problem is there going on?
From someone who started from the outside and has come in, I see a lot. A lot with the drinking. Like I was very surprised when I started coming around religious settings and the amount of drinking. And actually when I first came to Florida, I was warned by people in recovery to be mindful around religious people because they'll push alcohol on you.
Wow.
And so a lot of people who are Jewish and in recovery won't come around the religious world because of the amount of alcohol abuse and drug abuse there is, which to this day really surprises me.
And who's talking about it? Not a lot of people.
Not a lot of people. I mean, you've got Svi Gluck up in New York. You have some people down here. Gedalia Fenster, talks about it, mentions it a lot. He's in the recovery field. So you have people starting to talk about it, but it's not being. No
one's in the forefront.
Yeah,
no one's out in the forefront in the mainstream. Going into kids in yeshivas, going to girls in Beit Shah and saying, "Hey, look, you start taking this path, you go on this path. It's going to end up ugly."
Yeah, well, and it's not just that. It's it's people who have already taken the path and giving them love and understanding that's really necessary.
Well, that's the second part of it.
Yeah.
The first part is telling people, well, it's dangerous.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry for digressing. So you're back in jail.
So
you made a deal with God.
Made a deal with God. I had this great, awakening moment, and I started making contact with people back in recovery. I started asking for books. I started reading literature. I was in prison for 2.5 years, and at the last year and a half, I ended up in the library. So I got to read a lot, and I started reading a lot of health books. I started reading a lot of religious books. There's a great program called the Olive Institute. It's a Chabad Shliach program. They send stuff to soldiers and people in prison and in jail. They sent me a lot of amazing stuff on hasidus, and I started making that connection with hasidus and recovery, and especially a lot with what hasidus talks about with food. And that if you have that mastery over your desire to eat, the mastery over all your other desires becomes much easier. And I looked at that a lot, and I started seeing the connection between what I was hearing in recovery, what I had been hearing for years, and what I was learning on hasidus. And there was a really nice marriage between the two, especially with Breslov. Rebbe Nachman, a lot of what he talks about, that simple conversation with God, you hear a lot about that in the recovery world, of that being the answer. The answer to addiction is